what's going on. You know when you take a picture and you're really proud of it and you put your heart and your soul into it and you show someone and they say, wow, that's a really nice picture. You must have a really expensive camera. What would Cap do? What would Cap do? What would Cap do? It's like looking at a really nice, well-designed house and saying, wow, that's a nice house. The builders must have had really expensive hammers. Or saying to a chef, wow, chef, this is a really nice meal. You must have a really expensive oven. You don't call the waiter over and say, hey waiter, compliments to the chef's oven. Basically, the camera is not responsible for the picture at all. Just like the oven and the hammer, cameras are just tools. To prove that the camera is just a tool, I'm gonna make people think that I took a picture using a really expensive camera when in reality, I used my mobile phone. And I'm gonna show you how to do it too. By the end of this video, you're gonna be like a photographic ninja. Well, first, we need to have a conversation because how-to number 1 is subvert your own expectations. I need to get you on board with me first. Okay, so the camera is just a tool. Okay, I'm gonna prove it to you before we go outside. The camera that I'm filming on right now is a Nikon D800. When it was new, it's $3,000. And the lens I'm using is a Nikon 14-24 2.8, between $1,600 and $1,800. So you've got nearly $5,000 worth of camera equipment here. The D800 is what people have in mind when they think of expensive camera. On the other side, I've got my iPhone SE. The iPhone SE is definitely not what people are thinking of when they say expensive camera. I'm going to show you 2 pictures side by side. The first one was taken with the D800 and the 14-24, and the second one was taken just a few moments later with the iPhone SE. And both of them use all the how-tos that we're going to learn in this video. Do you know which one is which? So showing you these 2 pictures, I think your expectations have been well and truly subverted. It's time to start subverting the expectations of others. Because like you, they will also have certain expectations of what a phone picture looks like and what an expensive camera picture looks like. But it's winter in Romania, so I'd better go get a jacket. Okay. And I might need a hat. So at some point during that montage, I took some pictures with my iPhone using my how-to number 2, which is good composition. So I found something that I wanted to take a picture of, which was this cream house with this bright red roof, and it stood out really nicely against the grey mountains and the blue sky. So the first thing I did was I took the typical mobile phone picture. I walked right up in front of it, I raised my phone and I snapped, and that's it. And then I got out my expensive camera and I took the exact same picture. And I hope at this point you didn't think these 2 pictures were going to look any different. But then for my second attempt, I applied some rules of composition and I had a look around for another perspective. Because at the end of the day, it's a house and yes, it's in front of a mountain, but I wanted to see if I could find some sort of different perspective. So I looked to my left and I saw these puddles on the ground. Now, puddles are a photographer's literal wet dream. I've just seen some nice big puddles. And you know what puddles do, don't you? They reflect. And reflections look cool. So I walked over to the puddles, and in order to get the reflection, I have to actually squat down. So I found my new interesting perspective and I've squatted down and I've got my reflection in my puddle. The next thing I need to do is apply some compositional technique. And the one I applied was the rule of thirds. To give you an idea of what the rule of thirds does, if you have an iPhone, go into your settings, go to camera and then turn on grid. And when you go back into your camera app, you'll see it now has these guidelines on the screen. So the idea with the rule of thirds is you basically divide your scene up into thirds. And you can also put a point of interest on one of those 4 intersecting points. Another compositional technique I used is leading lines. Leading lines are natural lines that occur within a scene that lead the viewer's eye to the subject. So while I'm down in front of this puddle, I've got some options. I can use the leading line of the edge of the road on the bottom left of the scene to lead up to the house, or I can use the power cables on the top right to lead down towards it. I want to give you some more examples using the rule of thirds and leading lines. So I've just seen this bit of fence that's fallen onto this circular thing, and it's junk. But I'm going to try and implement these compositional techniques to make it look interesting. So here's the typical phone picture. And now, let's get down and let's use this fence pole as our leading line, and we'll lead it up to this circular thing here. There we go. So you can see how our composition tips of look for a new perspective and get down have combined with the rule of thirds and leading lines in order to make even this trash look interesting. To be honest, the rules of composition are more like guidelines than actual rules. There's no right and wrong, just keep practicing, keep experimenting, and see what happens. Now, when people say, wow, you must have an expensive camera, the picture they're usually looking at, as well as being interestingly composed, is usually beautifully lit as well. And this is where how-to number 3 is a bit tricky. I can't actually tell you how to light a scene, because every scene is different and you can't control the weather and the lighting. Even the most beautiful scene and interesting composition won't work if the lighting is all wrong. With composition, you often have a lot of control, but with lighting, you have to work with what you've got. But I can give you some advice and tips when it comes to lighting. So in photography, generally, light is a good thing, but if the sun is too strong and it's blasting everything with direct light, then things can become washed out and you get these really harsh shadows. On the other hand, if it's very overcast and the light is too soft, then everything can look flat and boring. But whether a certain light, harsh or soft, looks good really depends on what you're photographing and on your composition as well. Because sometimes harsh shadows can look cool if you use them as leading lines. Sometimes the stars can align and the best photographs just fall into your lap as gifts. And the scene, composition and lighting are all just perfect, and all you have to do is just take out your phone and boom. Other times you have to put in a bit more effort. You have to search, you have to research, you have to plan, you have to experiment, trial and error. Invest some time seeing what works and what doesn't work, and maybe even sacrifice some sleep in order to get the best shot. This is why it can get so annoying when people say, wow, you must have an expensive camera, because they don't see all that. So lighting leads me nicely on to how-to number 4, which is know your camera. Now, I've been saying a lot so far that it's not about the camera and the camera is just a tool, and that's true, but every tool has its own strengths and its own weaknesses that you have to keep in mind when using them. So in order to trick people, I'm going to have to play to the iPhone's strengths and try and hide its weaknesses. So what usually gives the iPhone away when you compare an image with the same lighting and the same composition to one that was taken by an expensive camera is image quality. You see, the iPhone's image sensor has 12 million pixels, or 12 megapixels, but the problem is the sensor itself is so small, it's 6mm by 4.8mm. And what happens is when you cram 12 million pixels into a space that small, they can't gather light very efficiently, which results in suboptimal image quality. So I use my phone so much that I have a good idea of what it does best and what it struggles with. In this example, I've got my rule of thirds on point, but the phone has struggled to reproduce the continuous grey of the dark clouds. See the difference when compared to the same picture taken with the DSLR. The same here. Instead, the phone usually does well with a bit more light and close-up detail, like in these shots. I have to be careful with far-away details though. At a distance, everything looks great, but even in well-lit scenes like this, Image quality falls apart the moment you zoom in. So in order to disguise the iPhone's lack of image quality, I'm going to have to find scenes that are well lit and don't have too much depth and detail. To be honest, many people don't know what good image quality and bad image quality is. So perhaps I can hide the iPhone's weaknesses in plain sight. So how-to number 5 is edit your images. And I'm going to show you how to do that. But before we get into it, I'm going to share with you a photography technique that will not only trick people into thinking you've used an expensive camera, but when you tell them you used your phone, they won't believe you. Now, I'm willing to bet that most people think that this kind of picture is reserved only for those who have access to thousands of pounds worth of photography equipment and have some kind of magical powers. But I'm going to show you 2 ways that you can do it with your phone. This first picture was taken using the typical mobile phone raise and snap technique. Yes, I'm in the water, which is a fairly interesting perspective, but I'm not using any of our compositional how-tos. This is the type of picture that most people expect from a mobile phone. Now I'm going to apply some of our compositional how-tos. Most people see this waterfall from the bank of the river, which is off to the side, but I've got waterproof wellies on, so I'm actually able to get in the water, which is a new interesting perspective. I've also got it down low, which immediately makes the waterfall seem bigger and more impressive. I've got my foreground, middle ground and background all nicely balanced with the rule of thirds, and I've got a leading line at the top and a sort of leading line at the bottom. Now, for this to work, it is absolutely imperatively necessary that you keep your phone perfectly still. Now, how you choose to do this is up to you. You can use a tripod, or you can put your phone on a wall or on a rock or on a log or whatever you happen to have available to you. So once you've got your composition and your phone is perfectly still, turn on live photos. Now, live photos only work with the iPhone 6s and newer, but don't worry, because for method number 2, you can use any phone. For now, once live photos is on, turn on the timer and set it to 3 seconds. And what the timer does is it prevents the phone from shaking when I press to take the picture. So once you've got your picture, go into the camera roll and swipe up. You'll then see these 3 effect options. The first one is loop, the second one is bounce, and the third one, the one that we're interested in, long exposure. You can see how everything in the photo that was moving has now become blurred, which is why it's so important to keep your phone perfectly still. With this technique, the parts of the picture that aren't moving are just as important as the parts of the picture that are moving. And one final thing about this photo is that it's got a lot of fairly close-up detail, which hides the iPhone's image quality issue. So the second method to achieve this long exposure effect is to use a third-party app. Now, the one I use is Slow Shutter for iOS. So with this app, again, it's imperative that your phone stays perfectly still. Open the app, compose your image, go to settings, choose motion blur, and then select your shutter speed. Now, for this waterfall, I used 4 seconds. There's also another menu where you can turn on your timer as well. And then press the button, and that's it. And now we can get into our 5th and final how-to, which is edit your images. When I say edit your photos, I don't mean just throwing an Instagram filter on them or HDRing the shit out of them, which I see a lot these days. No, that's not going to trick anyone. You can't create or edit a good image from a bad one. Editing brings out, enhances, or changes what you've captured and what's already there. You have to put the work in when you take the picture, which is what we've been doing so far. So let's get into it. So let's jump into Adobe Lightroom CC and start editing this photo. So you can see all our options here at the bottom. And these options are pretty representative of most editing apps. So you've got your light, your exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, etc. Your colors, effects, etc. The reason that I choose Adobe Lightroom is because, well, 2 reasons. One, there's a Mac version and an iOS version. So any edits that I make on my iPhone are automatically synced to the version on the Mac and vice versa, which is great. And another reason is these presets here. So whenever I make edits that I particularly like, I can save them as presets. And if you want to see an in-depth video of me editing a photo step by step and making a preset, then you can watch my other video where I edit a picture step by step and I create this preset at the end. But the preset I've created for these set of images is Pelesh, because they were taken at Pelesh Castle. So I'm going to apply my preset and you can see what it's done. You can see it's brought the contrast down, which I'm going to bring it up a little bit, and I'm going to bring the highlights up. You can see the highlights at the top there in the background, so you can see what our highlights is doing. I don't want them too down. So there's some details here in the shadows that was previously being hidden, so with the shadows I can just bring out that detail, and that is really it for this picture. I think there's a few color edits, so the brightness of the yellows has been brought up a little bit. I've saturated the greens a little bit, but apart from that there's not been too much done to it. So I'm happy with that picture. I'm gonna save to camera roll. That's gonna render, and then what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go to another app called Lens Distortions. I'm going to open our picture, and what Lens Distortions does is it allows you to add some realistic effects to your picture. So I usually just go for this one right at the top here. Now lens flare on iPhone pictures and any mobile phone pictures usually looks terrible, so people don't expect this sort of quality lens flare from a mobile phone picture, but I don't want to make it too overwhelming like over here. I just want it in the corner, just like that. And you can see some of the choices that I have here, like this one. I don't want to draw attention to it too much. I just want a nice soft glow as if the sun was over in that direction, just like that. And then I can export that. So this is an example of another image that I've edited using my Pelesh preset. You can see here the before and the after. And of course, like I said, you need to put the work in before you edit the picture. And what you have to be careful when editing is you don't go too far, especially on the iPhone. So you can see here in the continuous colors in the sky, if you bring the highlights down too much, they just kind of go to mush a little bit. So I'm going to bring the highlights up a fair bit, and now the sky looks much better. And also what you can do is you can bring the noise reduction up as well, so I'll put around 30 there, and we can sharpen a little bit, but don't over sharpen, because again all the details they don't hold up, they just go to mush, so just be careful with that. And this picture was created using all of the how-tos that we've learned so far. So as you can see, if I go to crop and get the rule of thirds overlay, you can see on the bottom right point here is the statue's face, on the top right point is the statue's foot. So I've got my rule of thirds down, I've got it down low to get a different perspective of this statue. You can also see here the typical raise and snap version of this picture, and after editing, you know, the colours, the golds and the blues and the greys do look quite nice, and there is a bit of a leading line here because it's going this way, but the overall picture isn't that interesting. It's just a statue, and this is the exact same statue. It looks completely different, it looks much more impressive, the picture's much more dynamic, it's visually interesting, and we have some nice details here in the statue's face, whereas this one, it is just, like I said, it's a raise and snap, and it's not going to trick anyone into thinking that your camera is more than a phone. So with how-to number 5 done, I'm ready to show my pictures to some people and see what they think. Expensive camera or iPhone?
I think it's an expensive camera because of the details.
Well, I think this one was with an iPhone.
iPhone or 5,000 euros worth of photography equipment?
Professional.
This
Camera.
is camera.
Oh. This one I think also with a professional camera.
Expensive camera.
iPhone.
This is the camera.
Camera.
Expensive camera.
It's kind of a tricky.
It is tricky. I was kind of hoping it would be tricky. It means I've done my job well.
Professional camera.
Professional camera.
This
Camera.
is camera.
Expensive camera.
Ooh. Professional camera.
Also professional.
Is the camera the same?
With the camera, you can see all this clear.
The lights
With
coming through.
lights,
the
yes.
lights, the ray of
In
light.
the phone on it's
On the
yeah.
phone, you wouldn't see it like that.
Expensive camera.
Professional camera.
Professional.
This is
camera.
nice.
$3 is nice, isn't it?
This is camera.
Expensive camera.
Professional.
This is professional.
I think it's camera.
This
Because-
is phone.
This is too much focus in here, and here it's just a little bit blurry.
For me, it's phone.
So phone and camera.
Camera, yeah.
Okay.
Expensive camera.
Professional.
Professional.
Camera.
Hold on.
Não, com o
No,
telefonul
this
nu
is
faci.
phone.
Nu faci cu telefonul.
Because of this.
The lens flare.
Yeah. This is phone.
Professional.
iPhone.
Professional.
This is camera.
Expensive camera.
Ooh. Professional.
iPhone.
This is camera.
Camera.
And there you have it. But I'm not going to comment on the people's reactions to the pictures because, to be honest, it really doesn't matter. This video was never really about tricking people. It was a photography tips video, masquerading as a how to trick people video. But the underlying theme of this video is that you don't need an expensive camera if you want a positive reaction to your pictures. Instead, just improve your photography skills and knowledge. So one and all, happy shooting.